Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Felipe Benitez. I am the Executive Director of Corazon Latino, and we are here at the USDA Forest Service Washington office. And we're really excited to be hosting or co-hosting this webinar on what's happening right now, exciting project that just got launched earlier this year at the Yunque National Forest. Before I do a formal introduction, I just want to give you quick reminders about this webinar, and we have also an audience here in the triple mid room. So if anybody's on the gate building and want to stop by, we're on the basement level at the triple mid room. So those who are joining us by webinar, just a reminder, they will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have questions, please make sure to type them in a Q&A box that is on the right-hand side of your webinar platform, and our Chief Operating Officer, Sonia Rangel, will be monitoring and letting us know if somebody has a question. The webinar will be recorded, and we will send it if somebody wants to see again all the wise words that we will hear from our friend Chris Nitch. And also, if you have any questions, comments, or anything, please send an email to Sonia at sonia@corazonlatino.us. Today, the speakers is myself, Felipe Benitez, Executive Director of Corazon Latino, Michelle Tamez, who is on her head of Agency Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Coordinator, Chris Nitch, which you can all read his big title, but he's the most important, he's the project lead for the Yunque National Forest Citizen Science Vegetation Monitoring Program. As we call it, the Descubre el Yunque for short, or REI. And also we have, I think we have Ricardo Santiago Garcia, ecologist at the Yunque National Forest. I think we have him on the line, but or he might be having a little bit of trouble getting, but we'll figure out. But he's also give us a perspective from the ground, from the Forest Service. Let me just change the slide deck and to get started. While I do that, Michelle, would you mind coming and giving us a quick welcome from the Forest Service side?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about this exciting project. So I am the Agency Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Coordinator, which means that I'm helping to get these kinds of projects started and helping people to find each other and to find resources and tools to do this kind of work. And I'm really excited about the presentation today because it's a really wonderful example of how a forest revision process on the Yunque National Forest actually led to some significant community engagement where that community actually wanted to participate further and be involved in monitoring. And so this program came out of that forest plan revision process. And since then, Yunque National Forest has published their forest plan. And I think this is a really cool example of what can be done along with communities and our partners to implement this kind of project. And I know that there are several national forests throughout the country that are interested in doing a similar kind of thing. So hopefully we can learn and share more about how this is working and best practices. So looking forward to hearing more about it today.
And with no further ado, I want to introduce you to Chris Nitch. And we have I'm going to be trying to solve a quick technical glitch, but he can go ahead and give you while we start using your slides.
Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you all for coming, the folks here in the room and also the people online. I'd like to say thank you to Felipe and his colleagues for organizing this and setting this up. And likewise, Michelle, for also hosting, and the efforts of Tamberly family who helped to make this all happen. They came together pretty quickly, and I'm very excited to be here and have this visit. So today I'm going to be talking about this new program Oh, okay. Today I'm going to be talking about this, our new program, which is, well, it's not that new anymore because we began last October. So it's our citizen science program. It's called Redescubrir el Yunque, which in English is Rediscover el Yunque. And I want to emphasize that this is a vision for a large program of citizen science, which currently has one project, which is a part of it, and that's the vegetation monitoring project, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. But you can see in the slide that's up there, there are three key partners. We have the Corazon Latino, we have the Forest Service, and then Amigos del Yunque, which is the foundation that I work for. And I'm going to talk more about the roles that each one of those plays as I go through the presentation. Okay, so to start, I'm going to give some context about where we're working and why. And for those of you who are not familiar with the geography of Puerto Rico, we're located in the Caribbean. It's the largest of the Greater Antilles. Within Puerto Rico, El Yunque is situated in the northeast part of the island. And you can see here on the slide, it's the green, it's outlined in green. And then the area around El Yunque in yellow is the focal area the Forest Service takes into consideration in terms of their planning process, and it includes all the municipalities that you can see there in blue, brown, and green. And so there are 9 of them, 8 of them which directly abut the forest, and one additional one, Humacao, which is part of that eastern region. And so these are the municipalities that the Forest Service is actually actively engaging in the management process, although they work island-wide with their vision. So here's a view of El Yunque, a really beautiful photo taken by a Forest Service colleague, Jerry Bauer. This is before Hurricane Maria, but if you were going to go there today, it would still look pretty green because the forest has recovered considerably since the storm. And one of the things you can gather is it is a large landmass of green infrastructure, right? Of green public land, open space. And to give you some quick facts about this, this is one of the oldest forest reserves in the Western Hemisphere. It goes back to the late 19th century. It's conserved by the Spanish Crown. It's about 28,500 acres, so it's really quite a large landmass for Puerto Rico. Its climate is tropical maritime, so it's pretty warm all year round, and we get a lot of rain. So Yunque is not only the most biodiverse forest, but also the rainiest within the U.S. National Forest system. You can see that it's close to 4,000 millimeters of rainfall on average per year, but it varies with elevation. So there's a lot of microhabitats which are really distinct. Really high species diversity in terms of native trees and vertebrate species. And being an island, you have a lot of endemisms, right? So you don't have the biggest or the most that you'd have in other continental areas, but you have a lot of unique stuff that you don't find in other places. It's a really important landscape for water within the island. About 20% of the water supply that's consumed in Puerto Rico comes out of the Yunque, and so it's really important for that provisional ecosystem service. And likewise, it's a really important icon in terms of recreation, both for domestic and international visitors, more than 1 million people visiting each year. And the history of El Yunque goes well back before the Spanish colonial times to the native people, the Taínos, who revered and protected the landscape as well. And it's believed that the name Yunque is actually a variation of the word Yuque, which was what the native peoples called the mountains there, which was white lands because of the cloud cover that surrounds the top of the mountains. So, and I think it's important to mention because there's a strong cultural history in the preservation of the Yunque, although formally since the late 19th century, but it really goes back several centuries because it's been conserved, since the native peoples lived there. Next slide, please. Okay, so El Yunque, as I was saying, is a large mass of public land, and it really is an island of conservation within a sea of development. Puerto Rico is heavily developed, and you can see that from the satellite image where we have all this urban and ex-urban development around the forest. And that's important when we start to think about the planning process. The recent management plan revision that Michelle was alluding to just concluded. It concluded, I believe, in 2017, but it was just formally finalized about 2 months ago in May. And importantly, this was a process that very much included the communities within and surrounding El Yunque. So there was a series of listening sessions and collaboration workshops, followed by public meetings, which include assessment and focus groups, and then validation of the direction for the plan alternatives. I was not involved in this. This was the Forest Service staff together with other NGO partners doing this, but it was a lengthy, involved process that really tried to integrate and involve the communities from the very beginning. And as a result of that, there's many interesting things that came out of it which are relevant to our project. One of them are the forest management areas as they exist today. And I'm going to give a little bit of background here, and if you have some questions about this later on, if Ricardo's on the call, he'll be able to go into more detail about that. But you can see that these different colors that represent the different management areas. And so there's a wilderness area, which is one of the largest wilderness areas in the U.S. forest system. There's a scenic area, there's research areas, and then there's this new area which didn't technically exist in the past, but is very much an important part of the forest, and it's known as the Community Interface Resource Management Area, or CIRMA. And that's represented here by the yellow color. It's about 2,900 hectares. This is lower elevation forest, secondary forest. And importantly, within the revised plan, one of the things that came out of these focus groups was the importance of implementing a monitoring protocol to gather data and better understand these secondary forest types and their plantations that were there in the past, and also to do that in partnership with communities, collaborating with citizen scientists, but also together with academic institutions and NGOs. And that's really, that became the bedrock for this whole project to be grounded upon. I'm going to give you a quick history lesson just because I think it's important to understand the background of what the CIRMA lands look like and why they do. So the Spanish Crown lands that I was mentioning earlier, they're represented there in green. But what today is the CIRMA wasn't part of that. And instead what they were, if you go to the next slide, they were farms. And they were heavily deforested. There were people growing all different kinds of crops there. There was timber production and cutting of timber there. There were coffee farms. It was really quite diverse agricultural use. And if we look at the historical images that we have from that time and reconstruct some of those maps that have been done by colleagues, we can see that you had a lot of agricultural, a lot of pasture land, and that shows up in the photos as well. And so in the photo there on the right, you can see that the lighter areas were areas that were cleared in the 1950s and earlier, whereas the darker areas were in forest for one reason or another. Next slide, please. In the 1930s and 40s, there was a large public works program throughout the United States that many of you are probably familiar with through the Civilian Conservation Corps and the reforestation of many lands that were degraded. And that also occurred in Puerto Rico. It was a huge program throughout the whole island, because around that time, the 1930s was the height of agriculture in Puerto Rico, and it's estimated that there was between 6 and 10% forest cover at that moment. But as part of this process, there was an incredible effort to plant trees. Some 60 million planted in Puerto Rico, 4 million of them within the national forest. And this was a time of experimentation with all different kinds of trees from outside of Puerto Rico, many brought in that have since become naturalized. And where the Forest Service offices, the headquarters, were up until Hurricane Maria is represented here in this photo on the left. That's the Catalina Nursery, which then in that same site became established as the forest headquarters, temporarily under construction since the hurricane. Many plantations were put in, right? The idea was let's make this forest productive, and brought in all kinds of species like mahogany and teak and eucalyptus to try and grow them. And this is a map from 1947 showing the location of those. So my point in saying all that is that there is an extensive land use legacy within the lands of the CIRMA that cannot be ignored. The other legacy, the other perturbation is a natural phenomenon in that of hurricanes. And so you can see we are right in the track of hurricanes coming over Puerto Rico. If we miss one, well, another one's going to sooner or later get to us. And we had a couple big ones in 2017, both Hurricane Irma and Maria. And that has an impact on the structure as well. So there's the land use legacy together with this the hurricane impact, which affects the structure. Here's an image of the Portal Visitor Center right after the hurricane, completely defoliated, right? And if you were to go back there now, the forest is pumping and green, and there's vegetation everywhere, tons of vines and lots of understory growth. So very dynamic system. So if we then go to today, the present day Sierra, what we have is this vegetation mosaic, which is of both native and introduced species, really diverse structure because of the land use history and the hurricane impacts. But there's a lack of specific data, and the Forest Service recognizes this. The last time a lot of detailed monitoring work was done was in the 60s into the 70s. And since then, there hasn't been that much done at a systemic forest-wide scale within the Sierra lands. There are other research areas where there is ongoing study being done, but not within the Sierra. And that's really necessary because the revised plan requires that they make decisions, science-based decisions on how do we manage this for invasive species in terms of the structure, in terms of what we want to do with it for ecosystem services. So they need the data. But they don't necessarily have all the resources to do it. And it requires partnerships to make that happen. And that's what this project is, really, is a partnership. Yeah, that would be a good point if Ricardo wants to add anything before I go into talk about the project in more detail.
Ricardo, you're on mute, so if you want to add any.
Hear me?
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks. That was a really great introduction. And as Chris was saying, the idea for this project is that we have this area of secondary forest in the current management area that is called the CIRMA. And basically the premise is that we don't actually know what the current vegetation is. Although El Yunque is one of the most heavily studied forests in the neotropics and worldwide for that matter, we actually don't know currently what's the vegetation in the CIRMA. We know it's a mix of species. We have the remnants of the plantations. We have the effects forest-wide of the storms and the hurricanes that have ravaged Puerto Rico and El Yunque. And we know that we have native species that have naturally emerged under the canopy of these other species. We also know that we also have invasive species that are growing in this area. And all of this mix makes a really interesting forest ecosystem. And as Chris was saying, on our new land management plan, one of the things that we need to do in order to manage the area is, first and foremost, we need to know what the forest is. What is the current structure? What is the current composition? And that's the first thing that we need to do in order to manage this area to reach the desired conditions of the new land management plan. We need to know what's out there in terms of, of what species are out there. So this project aims at achieving that throughout all the monitoring plots that are being established. We are going to be analyzing the data to know for sure, what is the current structure, the current composition. So basically, in a nutshell, what Chris has been saying is, this is what we need. This is the first step that we need to do in order to manage this area. Thanks.
Thanks, Ricardo. So I'm going to speak now. I'm going to turn more directly to talking about the project in particular. And I want to reiterate that based on the forest planning process, the project, the vegetation monitoring project, has dual goals. One being to understand better the composition and the structure of the CIRMA, but the second being to engage citizens in that process for a variety of outcomes, whether it's enhancing interaction with the forest and maybe in a new way, strengthening the ties with the local communities, improving and augmenting eco-literacy and knowledge of ecosystem services, and cultivating a new sense of resource stewardship. And those are long-term things. And from my experience working with other projects, citizen science projects, it's not always easy to do both well, where the data collection well and also the interaction with the communities. It can be done well, and we're really trying to both do well, but it takes a concerted effort and a lot of resources and creativity to make that happen. The time frame for this project is 2 years. So we kicked off in October, and we're going to go into October of 2020. There's Tamberly there in the photo. She came down and visited us and got right to work. Felipe, on the other hand, where was Felipe at that? He was coordinating. No, he came to the field with us as well. So we have 40 long-term monitoring plots. This number was chosen because it's feasible. It's also was chosen because it allows us to have sufficient robust data set to be able to do some analysis that we want to do. Would we like to do more? Yes, and maybe we will do more in the future. But for the first 2-year project, we're starting with 40. And they're distributed within the Sierra. That's represented now by the yellow on the map. It's distributed among the different geographic areas, which we've divided into north, east, south, and west, just for the sake of organizing them. And we distributed them according to historic land use by looking at the aerial photos from the past, so we could have plots that fall on areas that were both deforested or forested at the time of annexation, as well as proximity to the roads. And that proximity is really important from the element of bringing and getting the communities involved. When we went out scouting some of the plots originally, there was one that was about 1 kilometer in from the road, and Ricardo and I went out with another colleague, Nancy, and Angelica, and after about an hour, we had gone, I think, less than 100 meters, just chopping through the forest and climbing over, down trees and vines and everything. And then said, well, this isn't going to work. So then we revised that, and we said, okay, well, we need closer access to the roadways, but not too close because we don't want to have the edge effects. So we're going in at least 25 meters from the road. And we also are not working on slopes that are greater than about 30 degrees. And again, that's just for feasibility of people, for safety and being able to access some of these sites. So that limits us in some ways because there's a lot of the area with the steamer that right now we're not going to be able to cover with the citizens. Doesn't mean we won't go back and put additional plots in and perhaps cover them with a special task force of Forest Service personnel or super volunteers who are really up for that. But at least at this point, these are the criteria that we're using. This is the plot layout. It's modified from some of the forest inventory analysis. These are 0.1 hectare circular plots, and we divide them into 4 quadrants. And the purpose for that is really just for feasibility because we can't work a whole circle, a whole plot in a day, but we can work easily a quadrant, sometimes 2. And so we divide it into 4 quadrants, and then within each of those quadrants we have 10 square meter subplots where we're doing some additional analysis. And I'm going to talk about the parameters that we collect. But that gives you a sense of what that layout looks like. So it has a stake in the center, a PVC pole, and then we don't have anything else marked. We originally thought, we're going to mark out all these, and they were going to be square with 4 corners. And then we found it was so difficult to pass a meter tape through the forest and actually measure 10 meters and have it be precise. So we ended up going with the circular plots, and that's working out well. The methodology we're using is an adapted iTree methodology. And for those of you who are with the Foresters may be aware of this, it was developed by folks at the Northern Research Station and originally for use in urban forest settings, but it's also being applied in more rural settings as well. There are a lot of benefits to this. One, it is scientifically robust and has a lot of peer-reviewed literature behind it in terms of the methodologies, and it enables by collecting information about tree structure to then quantify the structure and the benefits that trees provide. But on top of it, the tools are easily accessible, freely available for citizens. And we've used in some other projects in Puerto Rico and urban areas, we've used these tools in communities, and we found that people like them because they can go and they can download an app, and there's a whole suite of tools, some that are more advanced and require a lot of data, but some that are very simple and you can use online with Google Maps and to do some simple analysis of cover. And that is an important element, I think, of choosing tools that are accessible to the community. We could have used some complicated GIS tools, and we decided not to do that because of licenses and other things, and then the level of expertise that it takes to run them. So we've been really pleased with this thus far, and we've had a lot of input from David Nowak and other colleagues who developed the iTree tools in terms of the adaptation to working in the national forest, and one that has palm trees and lianas and other things growing that they don't have in the temperate areas. The iTree concept, just briefly, is that tell me about the structure, tell me about how big is the tree, how wide, how tall, if it's missing something in its crown, and then I can do some calculations, right? The iTree has all these algorithms that are based on allometric equations to say something about the biomass of that tree, which can then be converted into ecosystem services, right? They're estimations, but as you get down to the species level, they get pretty good. And then if you're interested, you can take that beyond and do an evaluation process to say, well, what is this worth in terms of dollars and cents, which is very useful when you get down to the point of talking with policymakers and managers who are looking at the bottom line. And so this has been used in many forests across the United States. It's being used internationally now as well. I was just at a really cool symposium that it was the iTree Global Users Workshop, and it had people from all over the world who are using iTree tools and just fascinated in how it can be adapted to their settings. So it's growing, and now we're using it in the National Forest as well. The image here on the right is just showing in the valuation component how in Fox Valley, Wisconsin, the urban forest has been estimated to have a value of $5 million per year, right? So that's something that, when you talk to decision makers and the bean counters, that that might make sense to them. Okay, we're going to keep those trees because they're providing some sort of service. We find that's also useful when talking with the community members about, okay, this tree isn't just leaves that you have to pick up. It's also the mangoes that are growing in your yard, or the bananas, and that's money in your pocket that you don't have to go to the store and purchase those. And on an island where most of our food is imported, but we have a tropical climate, making that connection is something that we try to focus on. iTree Eco is the flagship program within the iTree suite, and it's the most robust. So this uses field data about the species and the structure, location data about the meteorology and microclimate, and it puts it all in, and then it can pump out at the end a bunch of estimations about ecosystem services, and also do forecasting into the future. So in our plots then, what we're doing is the following. We're going, and these are these 0.1 hectare circular plots, and we are tagging and mapping all the stems. And that's so we can go back and find them again, because we're doing this now. It's a 2-year initial pilot project, but the Forest Service wants these plots to be there for long term and go back just the way they do with FIA. And believe me, when you have maybe 100 palm trees growing in a plot, a lot of them look the same, and we don't have other reference points to distinguish them. So tagging them and mapping them is a wise thing to do. We are identifying the species to species level. We're fortunate not to have, and we have a lot of biodiversity, but it's not Yasumi in Ecuador, and so we've been able to thus far identify everything that we can that we've come across. This is being done in part with botanical experts at the University of Puerto Rico and the Forest Service as well, so we're drawing on a lot of expert resources. We are quantifying the structure, and specifically we are looking at elements of, again, how big is the tree, how wide is it, how much dieback there is, how much hurricane damage, how much of the crown is missing, because all these calculations then when they go into iTree, as many of you probably know, are necessary to then accurately calculate the biomass. And so all of this we are recording, and this is a process that I'm going to talk in just a few slides about how we're doing that and who's involved with doing all that. But these are the parameters we're looking at. We're documenting the canopy and the ground cover with canopy photography. We're using densitometers, and we're also doing some landscape photography and directional cardinal directions to then return in the future and do repeat photography. And so the technology here is really pretty simple. We're not using anything complicated at this point. The most complicated tool we have is a hypsometer to get the height of some of these trees. And that's really by design, because there are more advanced tools that we could be using, and we do plan on doing some analysis where we integrate this with hyperspectral data that can do more of the structure of the forest at a fine detail. But it was important from the perspective of working with the community members to have something that's accessible, that they could feel that, okay, I can do this too as well, and I don't need expensive equipment to be able to do this and be successful at it. And one additional element is the assessment of tree health, and this is really more of kind of a presence and absence of are the trees, is there fungus growing on them? Are they infested with termites or other insects? Are they covered with vines, lianas or woody vines, that's what we call them, and Yes, most of them are. They're covered and they look like that, which makes it a real mess for trying to assess some of these parameters. An additional element is to then link back and say, okay, this is what we see today, but these lands do have that legacy that I was speaking about before. And there's such a rich history that is available within Puerto Rico. The Forest Service has been there for a long time. The International Institute of Tropical Forestry has done research going back to the, I want to say that, I think the 1930s. And so there are really good data of the timber stands that were there and of the agricultural census data. And then it's just a matter of mining that and figuring out, what is the story of this landscape? How did it get to be the way it is today? And part of it is for the planning process so that people within the forest, within El Yunque National Forest can make better decisions, but also to link that to the legacies of the people who live there and live around the forest and maybe say, I didn't realize that used to be here. And yeah, my grandfather, he lived right near the forest and he used to tell me about that farm that was there. We come across some really cool things. You can see old witness trees and you can see wire going through them. Just as you have here up in the mid-Atlantic and the northeast part of the United States. And those are, I think, entry points for people in the community to feel, like there's something more connected to. That's what we've seen thus far. Okay, all this data we're putting into a relational database. This is something that we've created and we continue to refine. And so it has a set of forms on the surface that it's web-based, and then on the back end, it's all related. And importantly, we're making sure that we can integrate with the Forest Service NRM system because it has to all be entered in. We've had some initial discussions about that, and we're moving towards that in the near future. And also, importantly, that can be integrated with the iTree database because we have to get the data out of here and into the iTree in order to do the ecosystem service analysis. We didn't just use iTree itself because it didn't have all the parameters that we wanted, particularly for the forest conditions today. But in designing this, we did talk closely with the iTree developers to make sure that it would relate correctly. And the data are going in there, the imagery that we're collecting are going in there, as well as the historical archives. In the field, though, we are using paper, waterproof paper, because we don't have signal in a lot of places, and it's also nice to have that backup copy. Then, as a result of those data, they'll be put into iTree. We'll do the estimations of the forest ecosystem services. Primarily, we'll be focusing on carbon and air quality, but there are others that will come out of the analysis as well, related to soil and water. Go ahead. Yeah. And this is something that we are just starting to work on now is the development of an interactive web atlas. What happens with all this data? It goes to the Forest Service so they can do their planning. But we also want it to be available so that the community then can go and access this data as well. And we want it to be fun and interactive. And the idea that we have is we'll have this map, this interactive map you can go to, and you can click on a plot, and these images will come up, and it'll have, you can click and you can learn about the trees that are there. You can learn about the ecosystem services in terms of the carbon that might be sequestering. You could have some graphs that are showing the abundance that, on the graph down in the lower right, that's showing the abundance of the palm tree, the Sierra palm, which is by far the most abundant tree within the forest. And then also have, some of the experience of the volunteers and the stories and of what they're doing. We were toying around with the idea of allowing them to actually provide, sort of like a citizen's corner where they can put their own experience of working in X, Y, or Z plot. So that's something we're playing with right now. So how are we doing all this, right? It's not just me. I get to sit up here and talk about it, and I do go to the forest, but I have a lot of help. And it's a real collaborative group, and I want to talk about that for the rest of the presentation here. The collaborative partnerships. Who's at the table? Well, we have the Forest Service, of course. We have Amigos de Yunque, and we have Corazon Latino, and then we have these volunteer citizen scientists, and they are they are the heart of this program that makes it citizen science. And I put the map up here again so you can see that we're focusing on folks who are primarily from the municipalities around the forest, but we're not limiting our outreach to that. It's island-wide and potentially beyond. We do have interest from people outside of Puerto Rico as well. So these are the folks who are involved, and this is pretty much how it breaks down in terms of the roles that people are playing. The Forest Service is the big funder, and really is responsible for the macro level vision and the program management. Okay, and then there is an intern who's working with us, an SCA intern who is directly responsible for the volunteer coordination, the liaison between the volunteers that we're working with and the other pieces of the team. There's the Fundación Amigos del Yunque. We are administering the project overall and coordinating the day-to-day events. That includes the scientific design, which was done in collaboration with Ricardo and many colleagues at the Forest Service. We coordinate the field and the office activities. We organize the local community outreach together with the Forest Service and Corazon Latino. We lead the volunteer training. And then all the data collection and the management and analysis and dissemination, that falls under our purview as well. Corazon Latino is our face, right, to the world, and in our, much more than our face, right? Our tentacles, right, like reaching out into all these different arenas in terms of public relations and the digital communication, but also playing a role at the local level. They have people on the ground now who are helping with our local community outreach as well. The volunteer citizen scientists, they're at the bottom, but I certainly don't mean to imply that they're not important. They're probably the most important because they are the ones who are helping us on a daily basis with the data collection and the management and analysis, and also with the word of mouth and the local community outreach. Because by talking to one person, then they say, oh, so-and-so would be interested, or you should check out this. And we've actually found some new plots that we didn't think we had access to because someone else mentioned that you should go check this location versus another. One other partner is the University of Puerto Rico, the Environmental Sciences Department. I am also an affiliated investigator with them, and they've been providing a laboratory space, office space for us to meet and work when we're not in the field, and that's been key. So here is an organogram that is showing many of the different players. And the colors represent, the green is the Forest Service on the left, Amigos del Yunque is in the middle, and then Corazon Latino on the right, and then of course citizen science down at the bottom. What I want you to take away from this is the complexity and how, in order to do everything we're doing, we really need a lot of different people to play a lot of different roles, wear a lot of different hats. We have resource managers, we have administrators, we have people who wear education hats and do outreach and communications. We have coordinators, we have scientists and ecologists, and we're all interacting on many different levels and communicating, but it wouldn't happen if we didn't have this interaction amongst the different groups. I realize that a lot of programs don't have the capacity to have all these pieces, and maybe it's one person who's wearing, 6 or 7 hats at once, but having at least, I would argue that having a diversity of roles really provides a lot of strength and allows us to leverage the resources that are available within the groups.
And I may want to just to what you just said, Chris, Felipe Benitez, it's also a multidisciplinary team. Mm-hmm. So we have experts on scientific, we have web experts, everything. So that brings a very strong and a very efficient program.
And there's a lot of cross-fertilization. I only put a few arrows, but there would be like lines all over the place if you want to see the real connections. And just talking with Felipe today, I'm going to show you some numbers in a little bit, and that's just well beyond my knowledge capacity. I wouldn't have been able to do some of the things. And likewise, I imagine Felipe doesn't have the knowledge of some of the forest things that I have. So that partnership, again, is so important. So what about the engagement with the citizen science? With the citizen scientists. How do we do that? Okay, well we start off with some informational sessions. And this is done whether it's something we organize. We did one at the Portalito Hub, which is an informational visitor center near El Yunque. But we also go to cultural events. There's a Tinglar Festival, the Leatherback Turtle Festival we went to. There was International Forest Day. So we have a table, we invite people, we talk about the project, we do some demonstrations. On top of that, we do events like this where we have the presentations and webinars, and that is a good way to get the word out about the project.
And we're also working with community leaders that are trusted, that obviously have that access to the community to also spread the word, and we invite them to this event, so they help us spread the word even further. So it's a very comprehensive approach. Yes. So there's a digital media campaign, and I'll let Felipe just talk about this because he's the mastermind. Well, I just tell them what to do. Now we have a great team, as you said. We have, for those in the room, some of the team is here from Corazon Latino. But we're very strategic and very intentional on how do we bring the social media component, because early on we started seeing that just by putting a couple of social media posts, we started to get a lot of interest. People started showing up to events because they saw it on Facebook or because somebody shared it on Twitter. So we've been fortunate enough to have worked with the Forest Service in another digital campaign, Descubre el Bosque, which is this Spanish language campaign of Discover the Forest that is managed by the Ad Council. So a lot of our lessons learned, and a lot of the best practices, not only from that campaign but also from us doing this work with many campaigns, we're bringing the best in terms of what does it look, what's good. We do A/B testing. We put beautiful pictures. We put information. We see what engages the community and the users. And again, we're starting to form a very engaged community of users. And I'm going to give a little bit of the numbers here.
Yeah, that comes up in just
I'll give you a little bit of the numbers of where we are right now. But it's the results are by far the best that we've ever seen in a campaign in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and I'll emphasize it's happening at different levels. So we have the work that Felipe and his group are doing, and then Amigos de Yunque, we are also through our Facebook page putting it out after we have workday events, and getting it to the people that are following us. And so there's a lot of repetition.
And the Forest Service Facebook presence from the Yunque National Forest also provides. So we're really bringing a multiplying factor. And again, as Chris just mentioned, for folks or for a person to actually act on something, they need to probably see it or hear it 3 to 5 times. So we make sure that they are constantly hearing, and we're yet to launch a little bit more of a traditional media portion. We're just doing some fine tuning, but once that comes through, then that will even increase.
So after the people hear about it and they get interested, they contact us, and then we have community training workshops. The model right now includes 4. We've done 2 of them, and we're doing them in different geographic areas around the forest. And what we do is we give them we start off with some theory in terms of the forest and the context, and a lot of what I already talked about earlier on today in the presentation. We mentioned ecosystem services and the role and the importance of these services to their daily lives, linking forest resources and whether they're in the forest or in their backyard to their well-being. We focus on the project objectives and the study design and the protocol, and then we go out and we practice that. You can see several slides here showing of where we engage with people to do the practice. And what I want to emphasize in this slide, and I forgot to mention in the organogram going back with the outreach and the different partners, you'll see here a bunch of people wearing yellow shirts. Those yellow shirts are people who are assistants who are working directly with me. They're a team that of mostly undergraduate students, some people who have recently graduated from undergrad. Some of them are paid, others are student interns who are receiving college credit, and others are just doing it as volunteers. One of them who currently came to one of our workshops and liked it and then said, I'd like to be involved more, and is now working as a volunteer with us. And so there is the working with the citizens element, but there's also training that is happening, professional development with students as well, and that is part of by intention, as part of the model, and it provides us consistency because I have them for at least a semester, and thus far most people have continued now for since the fall. So this is the summer is the third semester, and now many are going to continue into this coming fall as well, and that provides a lot of consistency for the data and working with the volunteers. And actually, they've gotten better at it than I am, and I like to go watch in the field and listen to them and see how they interact. Because a lot of the one-on-one interactions and what's selling it to the public is that interaction that they're having with their partner working in the field. It's very cool to watch. Within the workshops, we don't just focus on all the technical elements, but we also try to add in some other, not just the head, but also add in the heart, right, and other ways of connecting and learning and feeling. And Felipe has brought this together with Tamberly, whether it's through forest bathing or the Zumba. If you've never seen Tamberly lead a Zumba, my suggestion is that you sign up, because it's quite an experience. Forest bathing is wonderful too, and we do this at the beginning of the workshop as a way of starting off the day, right, of centering and connecting our hearts, and then we get into the nitty-gritty. But it's just a nice way to make a holistic experience out of everything that we're doing. Next slide, please. So then they do the workshop, and then hopefully they come back and say, yeah, I want to be involved more. And so many people actually do come and sign up. I have some numbers at the end I'll show you. And then we work in the field. We have field work days. There's a weekend day and there's a weekday day. And we work in 4 hour, usually from 8 to noon, about that time, or sometimes 4.5 hours. The volunteers are guided directly by the assistants. Like I said, it provides consistency, a lot of hands-on learning. We focus on a plant ID, morphologic ID skills. People are interested in that. How do I identify this plant? How is this different than another? We talk about the edges of the plants. We talk about opposite and alternate. We discuss how one plot is different than the next. How is the lithology different here, which might affect the vegetation, or we're on a slope, or it's wetter. And throughout all this, we really are emphasizing safety and a positive volunteer experience. We have a Forest Service vehicle there. We have an emergency plan, which was created in consultation with the Yunque National Forest safety officer. So that was built in from the very beginning because we're going to places that they're sometimes remote and can be dangerous in terms of the physical liabilities that there are. Yeah. So we are tracking volunteer participation in the database that we've built. We've built the ability to put in who is participating in what, whether it's a workshop or whether it's a field work day, and then so people can sign up. Up on the left here, you see there's like a button where you can sign up for reserving a space, so then we know, and then we get an email that says, okay, so-and-so wants to participate on such and such a date, and then after they participate, we take a picture, and then we put it in the database, and then we can keep track of who is participating when and where. Some of the challenges here, because there's always challenges, we have 3 big partners, and we have a lot of things in common, but we also have diverse goals and personnel capacity, and we're working through that on a daily basis with a lot of communication. Like I said, there's the need to balance the forest management and public engagement priorities. I think we're doing it pretty well. We'll find out as we go along, but the feedback has been good thus far, both in the Forest Service and the people that we're working with in the communities. There's a limited tempo, scope, and funding. So like I said, we'll get to 40 plots, and hopefully we'll get them all done. The field conditions are tougher than we expected. I had gone out and done some scouting, but I wasn't prepared for how messed up in terms of how difficult it would be in terms of all the lianas that are all over the place and the fallen trees. And it slowed us down. There's been we've gotten rained out in some days. And so, some months we complete 3 plots, and other months we complete 1, but we're trying to stay on pace, and having the assistants who are consistently coming week after week, that allows us to make progress if even the volunteers don't show up. What's the next one? I'm sorry. I did that. Oh, okay. So the numbers. Okay.
A couple of the numbers on social media. We really launched the project as a Redescubre Yunque a little bit more than a month, and we've already got quite exciting numbers, 6,000 followers, likes. We already reached 420,000 people have seen the message. We have, and most important, this is all people, followers, and people that are in Puerto Rico. We can identify through the Facebook and social media analytics. So again, we're just seeing that on social media is creating that a lot of interest, and then we are seeing that transform into actual participation. We're seeing a lot of people joining, participating. That how do you find out? We found out because of Facebook. So we're measuring, we're testing the different transformation or I forget the exact term, but
the translation into
exactly how they translate from a like to an actual volunteer hour. So we're getting there, but the numbers are quite impressive at this point.
Yeah, and like I said, I had no idea how to do any of that stuff with the social media, and so that's again one of the strengths of the partnerships of bringing different skills together at the table. We've trained close to 60 people in the workshops. That's half of our goal. We were hoping to get 120, and we've had 2 workshops, so we're on pace for that. About almost a half of the people who have been trained have come to work in the field, which is great. That's 45%, and most of them come more than once. and that's really nice. So we've logged a lot of volunteer hours, and we've been able to complete 13 of the 40 plus, and we've measured over 1,000 trees. And you can see some of the quotes on the right of the responses of people, of the experience, the volunteers, what they think of the project. So just thinking, beyond the project itself, I mean, we really hope that this becomes a transformational experience where people get involved and do have an increased knowledge and capacity and interest in being involved, in sustainable resource management. That's one of the goals of Yunque, and it's one of the goals of this project. And we'll have to do some longer-term analysis, actually, and evaluation to see if that pans out. But I think it's promising. Oh, okay. So just to finish up here, so I showed this slide in the beginning, right? We have a Yunque, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. How do I make that go?
What do you want?
Next slide.
Oh.
Right. And there are citizens available, and there are resource managers, and essentially our citizen science program and the vegetation monitoring project are bringing it together to accomplish those goals. So we have a couple videos that we're going to post online because we're not able to show them here, but they give you a sense of what the project, some of the daily experience looks like in terms of the workshops and also working in the field. But I'd just like to close out and say thank you for your attention, and there's contact information up there if you'd like to get in touch and know more.
And I know it's 1 p.m. and this was scheduled for 1 hour, so if folks want to stay, we want to take some questions. If not, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know. While we wait, if you're online and want to post a question, please do it on the chat box. But let's start here in the room. Is there anybody who has? Yes.
Hi, my name is Mila. I'm with the FIA program.
Do you mind coming just so the people on the?
I can try to speak up now.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if to do this in the future, or to just, I missed the first part, but I was just wondering if the intent is to, if the intent is to monitor and see the trends over time, or is this a one time? And if the intent is to do this every 5 years or 10 years, kind of like we do at FIA, I was curious to know about if you are not concerned about the plot location, which is one of the biggest concerns for FIA, so it's not out there on purpose. And I also saw that you have that atlas that you can click on the location and get the information. Aren't you concerned that perhaps releasing that information might alter the results the results in the near future?
Yeah.
Not so much today, but five years down the road.
Yes. That's a fair question. That's a good one. It is something, so to answer your first question, I believe that the long term, yes, the Forest Service would like to monitor these plots again. This is the project has resources due at one time, but I think the intention is to find those resources in one way or another to go back and monitor them again and see the change, just as the way FAA does. As far as the locations wise, the actual, when you click on those dots, the actual Latin longs that's something that we don't have publicly available at the moment, so you can't necessarily go and find them. But many people know where they are because the volunteers are working in them, and they're not that far from the roads. And so it's, word to get out about the plots. That's something that, the Forest Service and together with partners such as Amigos del Yunque really needs to think about and discuss. I don't have an answer. Perhaps Ricardo, if he's still on, might be able to speak to that more long term. But as far as we are taking care to make sure that they're not right with near a pathway or right within something else that is there's access to and lots of people are going to. They are rather hidden in that regard.
Right.
But there is potential for.
It's not so much about hiding them. For us, it's or the way I understand the program, the FIA program, is about intentionally for policy purposes, groups going and altering the plot data, altering the circumstances or the survey, right? Yeah. So if they alter the plot, then you are measuring with just 40 plots, you're going to have a bias in your information that is not representative. And that's why FIA puts so much emphasis in not disclosing
Yes.
plot location, so it cannot never be altered.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that will have to be disclosed clearly.
Yeah, right.
Some of this data. I think that's one of the trade-offs that comes up is we're trying to do the science well, trying to do the public engagement well.
Right.
And you know, maybe one thing that'll have to be done is some evaluation of how much alteration, maybe, you know, have some experimental plots where we actually try to test that. That might be something the Forest Service decides to do. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
But
I think it's
a great point to
phenomenal.
bring up, so thank you for your comment. Ricardo, are you still on? Did you want to say anything with regard to the quality of the data and potential interference from the public?
Hello there, this is Albert. Ricardo left me here to keep listening, but he actually has another meeting at
All
work.
right.
So he just left.
We'll get his input.
Albert is the volunteer coordinator in the Forest Service.
All right. Is there any other question here? No? Sonia, is there any question from the...
Yes, there's one question from Yunque National and the question is there a possibility to extend these efforts to other forests in Puerto Rico?
Of course.
Yes.
Possibilities. I think that would take coordination with the Department of Natural Resources and Environment. Part of the discussions we had originally when we were thinking about where the plots would go would be like, you know, putting them on private land outside the forest, and because that's where the public is on a regular basis. At this point, we haven't had the focus is within the forest, and that's primarily because of feasibility. But I think if this is successful, and then we find that it would make sense to do this in other forests, I don't see why not. It would require additional partnership with more agencies to do that.
And if I may add, I think we developed a model that can be adapted, can be scalable, can be, and I think the important thing is that we are documenting all the challenges, the successes, and the best practices, and then can be not only in Puerto Rico, but I'm sure it will serve in many other places. There's another question here.
Yeah, I stepped out and somebody else asked a question. Sorry about that. But can you say a little bit more about the social connections that have developed between the partners and the teams for doing the same science?
Specifically, when you said referring to the volunteers, the volunteers? Yeah, I kind of, I think that there's a lot of great camaraderie that I've noticed. You know, some of the volunteers who come back end up working with the same people again because they enjoy the experience that they had with them. I don't know how much communication there is going on beyond that experience. We have people of all different ages. There's some of the people who are quite young in their teens, and then some older folks who are up into their 70s. I found that the folks who are retired have really, several of them have said to me, they really enjoy the energy and the positive opportunity to contribute and be a part of a group, and they feel energized by being around a group of younger people who are working and doing this. That really struck me. You know, they feel enlivened.
And if I may add, what we're trying to design in upcoming community events and engagement is to actually do that. It's actually to get those who have participated to share their experiences, to be the leaders. So we're in that program. And again, we've done a lot in a few months, but part of the integration of part of the outreach project is exactly that. Is how do we bring that human dimension? And I would love to discuss ways with Estella from Biophilic DC. So it might be an interesting way to find some ways to measure and to see what the impact is generating.
I'll just add to that. One of the things we plan on doing at the end of the project is presenting back to the community. So we have some informational sessions that we start with, and then at the end go back. And really the vision for that is that many of the volunteers who participate will invite to be part of the team and present about their experience and what they did and demonstrate and so bring it full circle. It's still a year off, but it's coming together, and I think that would be a very enriching experience.
Okay. Well, it's 1:07, and I want to be. Oh, there's one last question. Let's do that last question.
So from Lou Fernandez, She has a question on logistics. Is transportation to monitoring sites an issue for volunteer citizen scientists? And if so, how do you address this challenge? And then also, can you share on shift of attitudes of community members who have interacted with the project, whether it was through events, workshops, or through volunteering?
Okay, so for the first one, we are addressing that. The way we work is we have usually a meeting point where the volunteers will come and leave their vehicle, and then they'll go in a Forest Service vehicle with Albert to the site where we're working. And so that takes care of the transportation to the sites, and we're in the process also of working out reimbursement for gasoline for them to get to that meeting point, because it is a commitment of both time and resources to go drive. Some people are coming from far away from the forest. So that's how we've worked it thus far. The people who are working as part of my assistant team, we organize and drive separately and then meet the volunteers there. And that's working well thus far. It takes a little bit more coordination now that we're moving farther away from like where the Forest Service headquarters are, but we've been able to do it, and people are showing up, so that's good.
So the coordinators have vehicles?
Yes. The volunteer coordinator has access to a vehicle, which he goes and then gets in the morning, and then comes to the meeting spot where the volunteers park their vehicles and then drives them and then brings them back. That's the way it's working thus far. There may be times where we decide to meet like in a parking lot or something like that, and we haven't done that yet. It all depends on how many people we have on a given day and where the plot is. So we've been able to make it work thus far. As to the second question about, remind me again? The shift in
attitudes.
I really can't say yet. That's something that we need to evaluate in a formal sense. No one has come to me and said, "Oh, this is going to stink," and then and then go through the workshop and loved it. But hopefully there is some sort of shift in attitude. One thing we didn't do, and it would be worth doing at some point, or is a more formal evaluation of a pre and post, social analysis of that change in the attitude and experience. That wasn't built into the initial project, but it's something that we are thinking about.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And usually there's a baseline. People who spend 4 hours, decide to spend 4 hours in the training or in information sessions, people that already have that interest, or they're really already connected. I mean, in Puerto Rico, there's probably nobody that's not connected in some shape or form with the Yunque, either an emotional, psychological, or a professional way. So there's a baseline, I don't think, as you said, but it will be interesting to see, to try to figure out if there's an even deeper connection, a deeper trigger there.
Right. I do hear a lot of, "Well, I never knew that. Oh, I'd only ever gone to the river. I'd only ever done this. Oh, wow, that's really neat. I never knew that was there." Or just talking about, the way things grow. Well, I didn't realize that when you cut a palm tree, it's not going to grow back. Well, there's a reason why, and it's because it's a monocot, it's not a dicot. Different kinds of plant structure, and it opens up these observations that people make, open up an opportunity to have conversations and learn more about forest ecology or ecosystem services or what have you.
And even the name of Redescubre el Yunque, that goes into that notion that people may be aware, they may have fond memories from throughout their lives about the Yunque, but really rediscovering in a different way, through a different sense, areas where you may have not, that is beyond the Portalito or the Angelito Trail, it's areas where are not as accessible. So
yes.
So yeah, that's another interesting element that we're seeing. All right, so it is 1:11. Thank you very much for everybody in the room and everybody online, and we're delighted. Thank you, Chris, for taking the time. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kimberly, and everybody who was involved in this. Thanks to the team for being here. All right.
Thank you.